Today's edition of the podcast is brought to you by Coach Me Plus. Coach Me Plus is the leader in athlete management software and a product that I've been lucky enough to be using for a little over a year now. Only rivaled by the impeccable customer service that Kevin and his staff provides, Coach Me Plus's ability to constantly be amoeba-like in their ability to mold and matriculate what you're trying to get across and bring together is absolutely fantastic. Their constant pursuit of better ways and better methods and innovations and progress to their own product is absolutely fantastic. Go over to CoachMePlus.com. Check out what they got, guys. It's something that I guarantee you won't be disappointed with. Today's edition of the podcast is going to be a little different than the ones we've had of late, and that's going to be my presentation from this weekend's Juniata Strength and Conditioning Clinic. And since I was told by Marty that I need to hurry these introductions up, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So guys, we're going to get right to it. In the presentation, I talk about where training is going and where I see it going with us, my thoughts on periodization, my thoughts on what our goals should be with our student athletes, and we get into a little bit of monitoring. So yeah, Marty, I hope this is quick enough for you, buddy, and let's get right to the talk, guys. I hope you enjoy it. This is going to be this week's podcast, so don't feel like you have to take notes. Feel like we're trying to have a discussion. What we're going to talk about here for the next, hopefully about half an hour, 40 minutes, is just what 21st century programming actually is. What we're doing now in this crazy modern world when it comes to building athletes, or more importantly, how we see what we do at the U of R and moving forward with our kids. And for those of you who don't know, predominantly we're talking Olympic sport athletes. This could trickle down into men's basketball. We'll see. The old adage that basketball never stops is true, so there's even less time to train kids and actually really focus on just development than there is with the Olympic sports. But we can get into all that, later when we get to the end. So what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about programming? What does that mean to you versus what does that mean to me? And to me, when we're talking programming, what I think we really need to talk about is what we say we actually do, right? So the first thing that everybody says is, the first thing we do, we talk about what we do here in the weight room, is we do no harm. Thanks. I mean, seriously, you didn't sit there and say, hey, pull out the Atlas stones and let's do an overhead squat on top of that thing on one leg. You need to sit there and tell people that the first thing that you're going to do in the weight room is not hurt your kids? No shit. Can we move on to what's important? Can we get past that? Please. Because that grinds my gears. I can't stand hearing that. Because in all honesty, if you're thinking, man, I'm going to beat these kids up and I'm going to see who breaks today. What? Come on, man. We're better than that. That's why the reputation we get as a profession we have is being a bunch of meatheads that scream and yell and cuss at kids all the time and then we have to turn around and say that. So let's please move forward past that, right? I don't think anybody in this room has ever said, I'm going to squat Mike Rankin until his back snaps today. What? Come on. Injury prevention. It's cool. It's nice to say, do we actually do it? If you say that our primary goal is injury prevention, then what happens when you get hurt? Right? What does that kid now think? All we're trying to do is prevent injury. Or is this actually just a byproduct of the training, of what we're actually trying to do? Can we sit there and now just say that, when you train and you get bigger and faster and stronger and more mobile and all these things, it could help decrease your risks of injury. It's not necessarily our primary focus, but it's something that comes with the territory. And, piggybacking off Alan this morning, talking about return to play protocols. And this is something that in the last 12 months, I've really started to take a bigger stand with, because we have a lot of things that we like to do, but we have a lot of things that we don't do that I think we should be doing. The primary example of that, when you're talking about people coming back from injury, hardly ever, and Jerry hit on this yesterday, hardly ever do we talk about movement technique. You know, I mean, it's no secret that Dr. Yesus has had a huge impact on me professionally. A biomechanist, special exercises, all those things, you know, carry into this. But how many of your kids, after they blow a knee, you know, they have the awful scenario that they blow a knee out, how many of them come back and in their rehab, they actually get taught how to cut at 90 degrees again? Like, wouldn't you just think, like, if you took a step back and you're like, all right, so let's look at this big picture, right? Jerry, what were the numbers? It was 2 degrees of rotation, right? And it pops? Okay. So if we're cutting and the mechanics are wrong or something goes wrong and pop it goes, why aren't you going to teach that kid how to do it right when they come back? I know it really sounds simple, but we really don't do it that much. We get into drills, and I think it was Boo who said, like, everybody wants to worry about drills, drills, drills. You get drills at aisle 6 of Lowe's. We need to start looking more at technique and how we move to get these things to go better. And again, bigger, faster, stronger, fitter. Again, are these just byproducts of what we're trying to do, which is develop athletes? And at the end of the day, what is actually in the center of what you're trying to do? And I think that that's really what's the most important question. Where do I see us going as a profession, other than putting a lot more words on the same slide, is being more progressive with what we do. Okay, and I know that there are situations and scenarios where this is very difficult, where it's very difficult to say, we have benchmarks where you have to get A before you go to B, and you got to get to B before you get to C. We're going to go through where we see it going, and hopefully we're going to tear it apart. I'd love it if I walked out of here with a completely different plan, but we're going to go through and look at it and talk about it. Minimal dose, such a sexy term right now. Everybody's looking for the minimal effective dose, but when we're looking at it really, is give them as much as they need, not as much as they can handle. Henk Kragenhoff's famous for saying that. If you've heard me talk before, you know the whole thing about cold meds. You'd never give somebody chemo for a cold, right? So why are we going to sit here and have a freshman field hockey player doing velocity-based training? Like, it just doesn't seem like that would be in the kid's best interest unless she came in as an absolute freak show, right? I mean, then we're talking apples and oranges here. But why are you putting kids in situations where they're so intensified early on that only bad things could end out happening? And what are we in this huge rush for, right? Very few kids end up being successful as one and dones, right? So unless you're dealing like with this new grad transfer rule, which could be an hour-long discussion in and of itself, you have 4 years to work with a kid, right? Why are we ever in a hurry to not make sure that they're in the proper position to be able to move on to more advanced work? And again, if you've ever heard me talk, I think that everything you do has to be performance-based. I think that's our job. Okay, so what are the common characteristics of the actual sporting exercise that you need to train, right? And then on top of that, what are the common elements of that cross all sports, cutting, sprinting, jumping, things like that? You know, Ethan Reeve talks about it all the time, how you need to make them better athletes, which is why he gets into the gymnastics and the handstands and things like that. And then, of course, you know, the happy term of dynamic correspondence, which kind of gets bastardized quite a bit. But really, we're just looking, are you moving the joints the way they show up in the sport, at the same angles, the same velocities, using the same contractions? That's what's important, right? That's the carryover. That's what shows up on the field. So when you tie these things together, right, if you're moving in a progressive manner at the minimal dose, we could call this stress management, right? If you're not able to handle the load and you're not prepared to handle the load, we don't increase the load. If it's test time, midterms, and your kid's brains are all over the place. They're walking around like zombies. They need drool cups because they haven't slept in 3 days. It's probably not the best time to hit a max vert or to hit a max clean or to do anything really heavy, right? We know that. But just because it's on the paper, or 4 months ago when we wrote our plan, we sit there and we say, well, you know what? Today it's 95% for 4 triples. Go. Let's see what we got. When you look at your minimal dose and you're looking at performance training, then we're getting into durability, right? Because the more you can handle, the more you load, the more stress you can have put upon you, the more durable you are. And then if it's progressive and it's performance-based, so improving special exercises, Alan was talking about stiffness and tension and all of those things. So looking at extensive short coupling jumping, where you're bouncing, okay? That's not a plyometric. There's a name for it. That Verkhoshansky guy came up with it. Extensive short coupling jumps. Ankle bounces, bounds. Box jumps where you're just bouncing on and off. Where you develop these contractile elements and you're working not just with the stiffness of the muscle, but the ability of the tendon to be the mover, which really is what we want, right? When you're quick, you're doing things like that. You're doing things, we're talking paw back, knee drive, lunging exercises, cutting technique work, where you're looking at those things. If you can move faster, through a greater range of motion, stronger, with more force, whatever you want to call it, to what you're doing, it sounds to me like that's a pretty good recipe for prehab, which I don't know if that's even a word. I don't think prehab will ever make it to DC for the spelling bee, but it's what we're looking at, right? And then in the middle of all of that has to be what's best for that individual athlete. And you know what? If you're sitting there being like, yeah, sure, Jay, that's easy. You got 15 guys. You're right. I got a room right now of 8 cats. I've got me, I've got a full-time assistant, and I've got a couple of interns that I could at least have run around and set up stuff. You're right. It's a different situation, and I'm lucky. But that's the same stuff I do for the swimmers, and there's 28 of them. So you need to be able to look at it and do the best you can with making sure that the athlete is the center of all of the models that you're using. So then the next thing that we need to talk about, right, is the needs analysis, because this is something that gets thrown in our face early on. And I think that early in our careers, when we were in grad school or when you were about to take your CSCS, this was like the hip thing to do. Like you'd show up at practice and you'd like watch the kids move and do all this stuff and try to implement things that mattered. But I think that this is something, and I'm just as guilty as anybody, that takes a back seat. And we need to be better at this. So we need to look at the sport in general, right? What are the specific characteristics that transfer across all games? Again, we just talked about it, cutting and those things. You've got to know the specifics to the position that they play. How we play basketball is different than how Drexel plays, is different than how Robert Morris plays. So my four-man, what he does, if we even have one, is different than Hammer and Mike. But you have to understand how those things show up, what they're responsible for in the game, how they're supposed to move in a game, how much room they cover, how much distance they cover, how fit they need to be, so that you can actually train the kid to be better at what he's supposed to be, and that's be your power forward. And then you got to know the athlete, right? You're never going to make a donkey a racehorse. Hank said that. I mean, you could take him to the Belmont Stakes, but you're not going to win any money with it. Injury history, strengths, elasticity, speed, quickness, all of these things. And then we can get into the entire talk of, is our goal to make them better at what they're really good at? Or to pick up the things that they suck at? Because I'm leaning more towards the prior than the latter. Unless, of course, it's going to put the kid in a bad spot, right? Like it could hurt the kid. But if you've got, if we just look at jumping as the example, If you have a kid that bounces well versus like a pusher, you guys know what I mean by that? Anybody? Do you understand what a pusher versus a bouncer is? No or yes? Okay. Well, why would you train a bouncer to be a pusher? You know what I'm saying? Are you wasting time trying to make them what they're not, as opposed to making them better at what they are? There's a reason they are where they are, right? Like they're good at their sport, and the characteristics that they possess as an athlete are what make them good at their sport. But is what they're good at, is that the limiting factor, or is that what you should drive? I'm not giving you the answer. I'm just asking you that question because I think that needs to be thought of with every kid that you look at. You know, what are we actually doing? Are we trying to make Eric better at what Eric is, or are we trying to pick up the things that he is not as good at in order for him to become better? So looking at the athlete, right? So you got a basketball player. What do you know? You know that they need to have a really high level of aerobic fitness, contrary to popular belief. They need to be quick. They need to be able to change direction. They need to be agile. You know that most of them have tight ankles, right? The whole moon boots and ankle braces thing, we've had that talk a billion times. And most of them have poor mobility and poor flexibility. If you're talking about a stretch four, guy's probably not a banger, right? Wants to sit outside the perimeter. He wants to chuck shots. When he gets hot, he gives you 30. When he's not, he gets a seat. He's going to guard smaller players probably because he doesn't like to bang. So he's got to be able to move well, but he's still got to go get you boards, right? He's going to be the second biggest guy on the floor. He's got to get you rebounds. And then let's talk about just a random guy that we have on the team, right? Super long limbs. Super duper long limbs, but the cat is the most immobile, stiff dude you'll ever see. An elastic jumper and cutter, okay? But he doesn't cover enough ground. So he can bounce all day, and he can bounce high. And he can bounce to cover distance. But he doesn't have the mobility to open up and make those distances as big as they should be. He's definitely more of a monster truck than a Prius. Okay, doesn't have a lot of fuel in the tank. He can't go for a long time. But he's a guy that lives off of confidence. So he's a shooter, right? And shooters are weird. You see one go in, you feel great, you might make the next 10. You clank a brick, you might not make one for a week. Training age is probably 2 years. Transfer kid. Kind of did some stuff before, kind of didn't. At least not how we do it. And then there always seems to be a little outside situation for him. So there's always some sort of external stressor that we have to worry about. So how do you handle this athlete, right? These are things that we need to look at more to make sure that we're prescribing the best thing for each kid. All right, so now I want to go on a little rant. Let's talk about periodization a little bit, okay? This is something that is, it's just overlooked, but all these things need to be accounted for. The first and foremost, and if you guys listen to the podcast at all, you will have heard a few weeks ago I had Andrew Althoff and the guys at Baylor on, and we were talking about just this, right? Like, we get into situations where we talk about periodization, but then you get into it's like the most important thing these kids do, right? The biggest amount of their training load has to come from the first thing. As much as we would love for them to be professional weightlifters or strength and conditioning athletes, they're not. So when your soccer coach says, I need a periodized plan where the third week you need to deload, and they kick the shit out of them at practice, what in the hell did you deload for? Because the biggest stressor is still the biggest stressor. Like, that's where people look and they take Vladimir's work, right? The block periodization, and they look at it and they're like, oh, we need the accumulation phase and this and that and the other thing. But at the end of the day, the reason that works with the athletes that Dr. Isern works with are because He's in charge of everything. Henk Kragenhoff's in charge of everything. So when they say we need to drop to deload to taper, it's not just we're squatting doubles instead of sixes. It's we're only running 200s as opposed to 800s. So if practice isn't being brought down as well, all you're doing is you're kind of like, you're not actually deloading. You're unloading a little bit in the weight room, but you haven't really changed the stress put on the athlete. You have to start taking into account the academic calendar. This is probably the only thing that I will ever be cut and dry. You have to do this about. Because Dr. Mann just recently, the study was about a year ago. They have a greater risk of getting injured during times of high academic stress than they do when they're in two-a-days. So why are you going to kick the crap out of them in the weight room? Or why are you not going to talk to your sport coaches about when these times come up to help protect these kids? And then the end of it is training, right? Like really the least important thing that we do, like they're student athletes, not student lifters. This all needs to piggyback everything the sport coach wants you to do, what their vision is. So this is where we're going, I think, right now. We'll talk at the end. Hopefully this is a new slide when we're done. Year 1, 2, 3, 4 is obviously hypothetical. If a kid is able to hit benchmarks, we move on. I think the big thing, again, most of you know, if you've been around me, that Dr. Yessis has had a huge impact on what I do. So a lot of people know me and the guys I'm with for following the one-step protocol. I truly believe that's now step 2. You know, when we watch our guys try to get in positions, general gymnastic type positions, it's awful. We all talk about how kids can't bend, you know, how they're not flexible enough, they aren't mobile enough, and developing a minimal dose idea. Well, why don't we teach them these things and build these patterns and these abilities to move and hold positions and whatever it may be before we load them? We talk about how we do it a lot. I don't think we do it well enough. I don't. Flat out, I don't. So when we look at the gymnastics stuff, this idea came to me listening to the Tim Ferriss show. He had Coach Summers on a couple weeks back, who I believe coached, he was a gymnastics coach in the Olympics. He's talking about many things that follow Dr. Yessis' principles, so it really fits in well with what we're doing. So I went out and started trying their stuff, and to be blunt, I suck at it. So we're trying to build a program starting with some of these things, adding a lot of bodyweight stuff with it, and then getting into implements like kettlebells. I think people don't understand how to hip hinge. I think it's a great tool to teach it. People don't understand really how to squat well, you know, and the whole deceleration position that Jerry got into yesterday. I think the goblet squat, like Dan John talks about, is one of the best tools to teach it. You can do it with 2 hands, 1 hand, offset, overhead, carries, rows, push-ups, TRX, whatever it is. Build these general, simple bodyweight strength exercises, and then we move into the 1x20 following Doc and Natalia's protocols. The reason I think that'll work well too is we've had very good success with the second, but I think we would have greater success if we were more prepared to start the general prep work. You know, once you lay a big rock, you can only fill sand around it, right? So can we lay more stones to build a bigger base with these kids so we can build on it longer? Year 3, where we're at now, 2 to 3 sets of stuff. Start teaching pulls, start teaching presses. Yes, we are doing some Olympic variants now. And the kids are better at it now because they have a better strength base than when we would start doing it right away. I don't know, maybe it's just the group, or maybe it's just something that makes sense to me, right? Like, you have to be strong to be good at weightlifting. So when my freshmen come in, and 135 hits their chest like a brick in the water, are we really ready to start thinking about doing explosive barbell lifting? Or do we need to build a strength base first for that to have a greater impact on what they're doing? And then year 4, I put VBT up there because Dr. Mann is someone that's helping out quite a bit with this. It could be VBT, it could be triphasic, it could be whatever. I think the velocity-based stuff is our 4th step, though, because just thinking about the direction we're moving, we're going from body weight, implement, more intensity, right? We can come back and talk about that later. Energy system development. Ooh, another sexy term, right? We still don't know where we're going with this. Mostly because right now we don't run basketball. So I'm not 100% sure. But I do still think that the primary factor that needs to be accounted for first is resting heart rate. If the resting heart rate isn't below 60 and they don't have a good enough general fitness base, anything over what people would typically call cardiac output work, whether it really does cardiac output work or not, is another conversation for another day. Low heart rate, long distance work, for most field sport athletes, is probably the most important thing. If you don't have a general fitness base, why are you doing a ton of tempo? You're not going to recover from it. Build the aerobic base and work your way out. And then the grand poobah of them all, right? Monitoring. And this is more about my mistakes and where I would have fixed it. If anything gets people going nowadays, it's monitoring, because everyone thinks that you get all these toys and it's like you're driving a space shuttle, man. You've got an Omega Wave, or you've got First Beat or Catapult or whatever it is, and it's like you're going to be able to do all this crazy stuff, man. You're going to Mars. You're slingshotting around the earth. You're going out to Mars. You're picking up Matt Damon and you're coming back. Yeah, it's really more like you should be riding with training wheels when you start. Okay? I was 100% this guy. 100%. I thought we were flying. We were going to the moon, man. And we went too far, too fast. And we should have pumped the brakes real quick. Because when you get all of these things, as a lot of you are now starting to learn, there is a ton of information. Now, if I knew then what I know now, we'd be 1,000 times better off. But backing up, I think, and Kevin Davidovitz of Coach Me Plus has said this a billion times, if you can't weigh your kids in every day, you should not add anything else to your program. The amount of information you can get just by weighing your kids in every day is immense. You can actually track that versus performance. Handy at George Mason has talked about this. Like when Paul Hewitt was there, they tracked body weights versus where the kids played their best, and that's where we're going to keep you. I mean, pretty simple, right? Like, especially with basketball. If you're too heavy, you're not going to move too quick. If you're too light, you're going to get chucked around. So if we put you right in your happy medium and you play better, why are we messing around going the other way? Hydration, right? Especially football guys, you know all about this. But, if you've ever been to a basketball practice, that are really short in duration, probably a moderate intensity. I mean, these kids, they're walking out, wringing stuff out. What are we doing to make sure that they're ready to go the next day? We've seen kids drop 2 pounds, 3 pounds in a practice. What are you doing to make sure that you're helping the kid be ready for tomorrow? And now you can start having conversations because of the numbers. And that's the biggest thing, and that was the biggest limiter that I had. Okay, is the inability to kind of share the information the right way. And this, anybody can do this, right? You don't need anything to start this. You need a pen and a piece of paper. If you use Excel, great. All you got to do is write it down and then put it in your computer. But every weight room in America has a scale. Our next step would be questionnaires, because they're super cheap and they're super easy and they're completely reliable, right? You can get a ton of info from them. You can look at RPE and you can get strain versus monotony of everything you're doing. And all that is just simple equations. You can find that online right away. Personally, if I were to do it all again, I would only start with sleep and soreness. Because as soon as you start getting into asking them other questions, if you're implementing other technologies, there may be conflicting thoughts. Like, you may not feel great, but you're ready to adapt to a lot of stress. Or you may feel great, but you're not ready to adapt to a lot of stress. Which then brings us to Omega Wave, which is like the grand poobah to me when it comes to athlete monitoring. For a multitude of reasons. The first being, we've caught 2 kids with cardiac issues with the tech. So right then and there, it's paid for itself. But the second being, you're able to look at things and move in a direction, but know that this thing is not a deity. You can always move one way or the other. And people have the issue where they think Omega Wave is telling me that if my CNS is yellow, I'm not able to jump today. Well, everybody on Instagram has seen the kid that we had go 45.5 last year. His CNS was at a -2. Popped off a 5-inch PR. Doesn't mean you're not able to do it. It means if you do it, you're going to have to pay for it later. You're paying with your credit card, not with your debit card. And you just got to know that as a coach. And then looking at player load monitoring, obviously when you're looking at catapult, polar, first beat, whatever it may be, just know these are things you could, probably that is the one you could start with early, but you have to know that whatever else you add in is going to put an impact on whatever you're doing with that. Okay, so let's go through it. I'm sure that I missed the boat on a couple things. So, questions, thoughts, comments, criticisms. This is an open room. If there's something that you saw on there that you either don't understand or don't agree with, I would love to sit here and talk about it. Yes, sir.
So would you say that when a school first gets the Omega Wave that it actually does more harm than good? Like for coaches looking at it and stuff like that, right?
I would say if you ever got possession of any sort of athlete readiness monitoring technology, the first thing that you need to do is nothing. You need to normalize everything. And once you do that, you can make decisions. If you're looking at just the central nervous system, I don't think you need to normalize it because you're either positive or negative. But when you're looking at some HRV things, there are some personality type things that can contribute to that. So if you're just a type B person, you tend to be more parasympathetic. It doesn't mean that your score when your HRV is high necessarily means that you're not able to handle a high volume of aerobic work. It could mean you are who you are. You would have to go through and do the long test through the computer just to make sure of that, though. But no, it's the other thing that I would say is you're going to do something early on, and it's going to, quote, fix things, and you're going to do it again, and you're going to think you're the dumbest person on the planet because it's not going to work. You got to pump your brakes a lot with it. There's a lot of learning that goes on. Yes, sir.
As part of that, do you have to do any long baseline measurements
No, it's 2 minutes. You can do the long test whenever you want, which is 7 minutes. But yeah, that's up to you. Yes, sir, Coach.
You said the main way you identified a heart issue. Was that something like that caught in the pre-screening physical? And what did you catch specifically, and what was the solution for that?
The last one was a grade 1 AV block, so it wasn't really ending up being dramatic. It was not caught in the pre-screening physical. But since then, we have now gone, and every student athlete coming in gets a full G. So it's changed. I think there's a multitude of things that have changed that particular way we handle things at the institution. But, I mean, after we found it, I mean, now, the technology in and of itself does not say this individual has X. It says this individual needs to see a physician. So it showed up like 3, 4, 5 days in a row. And I kept going to our athletic trainer. I'm like, he's not doing anything with me until you take him to the doctor. And then they looked at it, and actually our general practitioner wanted to have everyone do it. To set up and run an omega wave test in their physical, but they decided they're just going to go and do this instead, which I'm fine with. Anything else? Yes, sir.
How are you implementing your aerobic training, and how are you modifying it, or are you modifying it for athletes who need the hypertrophy?
Well, we're not doing it with basketball right now because all they want is for them to hypertrophy. We're still practicing. They're still playing. We're just not doing any fitness work. I think that when we're talking aerobic work, if they've already passed having a 60 beat per minute, sub 60 resting heart rate, and you're running tempos, or you're to a point where you're running 5-second hill sprints, or whatever, I think your conditioning is 5% of the factor, and your kitchening is 95% of the factor. I think you need to worry about that way more than this, because even if they need to get bigger, which is great, which is fun, which is the stuff we love, if they can't run a 110 or a 40 or hit a few hill sprints for 5 seconds, who cares? You can get bigger and you can run. Ben Johnson was a big MFer, man, and he was fast as hell. And he ran tempo all the time. And everybody in that race was on drugs, so I don't want to hear that. Anything else? I mean, seriously, like, I would be more than willing to like rip this all apart and start over. Okay, cool. Yes, sir.
Coach, how does I know Moody's a tough deal.
This is where we plan on going.
Yeah. How would he? I'm sure you have a good relationship with him, but how do you think he or a tough coach would be about saying year one rolling into 5 seconds?
We're working on that, and that's a great question. His biggest concern, honestly, was the fact that he doesn't know if, because we're not, quote, lifting a lot, are they going to come in and get pushed around? We're going to get stronger. And we might actually get similar strength gains, right, as we would in the initial 1x20, because all you're doing is really learning how to lift in the beginning, right? So I guess the way I'm looking at it, and feel free to call bullshit on this, but this is legitimately how I'm looking at it, is no matter what, you're going to go from point A to point B initially, right? Just because they're starting to do something. Wouldn't we want that something to be the simplest, smallest load, just general type movement, body weight, whatever, if we're just going to get a specific adaptation anyway and add on to it more and more and more as we go? Are we just going to sacrifice 4 years So an 18 or 19-year-old kid can play 6 minutes instead of 4. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, again, we don't have kids leave early. Good, bad, or indifferent. If they leave early, they're probably not going to be a Division I basketball player. So if we take, and it's push-ups and variations of, squats with implements, one arm overhead, swings, one arm, moving, carries, inverted rows, pull-ups, dips, they're going to get stronger. Lunges, step-ups, things like that. So I don't know if his concern is actually something to be concerned about or not. Only time will tell. But I think that if you take a step back, again, and you look at it from like 15,000 feet, that base stuff with the simplest stuff, and you just keep adding complexity, implements, intensity, speed, it just, to me, sounds like it makes sense. Does it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm good at convincing myself stuff. Yes, sir. I don't work in football just because, I don't know. I think every D-line coach in America is going to say, that kid can't bend. Now, are you going to have to do different things? Yes. Could some of this stuff be implemented in your redshirt program? Why not? I mean, let's be honest. If you're just doing gymnastic stuff and stretching and holding positions and getting into these things in your warm-up, could that have a little more bang for your buck helping your kids down the road? You know? And all along, for the most part, you're teaching your redshirt kids what? How to work and how to lift, right? For the most part. I don't see why that couldn't work in. I know football teams have had good success with the 1x20. But I don't know, personally, never working with football, if I give you a response to that, it would be ignorant at best. But that's just where I could see it, possibly. No worries. Yes?
What about the kids that come in that have a lot of training years and have good experience and good?
You move them faster. You move them through faster. You know? Like, if they can do this stuff, let them go, right? Like, if you've got a kid whose resting heart rate's 48 and he can hold all these positions and he can squat well and they move through the progressions fast, great. Awesome. But you need to be able to see it first, you know? Like, I mean, how many kids come in and they've run a 4.540 and can squat 405? You know? I mean, it's... Yes, sir.
Getting back to Ben Johnson, the tempo runs. Charlie Francis' tempo runs were different tempo runs than they would use for like a distance runner. Am I right? Is that what you
Oh, yeah.
do? That type of tempo?
No, yeah. Charlie's type of stuff. Yeah, no, not like...
That's what
Yeah, we're Charlie Francis, not Steve Magnus. Yes.
Yeah, that's what you would use for
Right.
for the basketball game.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
What type of changes, if any, if they have a bad omega wave score?
Cliff Notes version. Parasympathetic, cut volume. Sympathetic, push it way aerobic. Low CNS, cut intensity. Other than that, it's filling it out. High resting heart rate, conditioning day automatically goes to Q word. We can get into nutritional stuff too with that, but we need beers for that one. It's 12 o'clock, we could have one. That's actually Tim Rusbason, one of my former assistants, he works for Omega Wave. That's all in the interview I did with him 2 weeks ago. If you follow them on social media, you could dig that up. I actually just put a chart that has all that information on it. And that's just what I did. I don't know if it was wrong or right. It seemed to do okay. Anybody else? Well, thank you guys, and for just looking forward. If you have any questions, CVASPS@gmail.com. That's the business account, and you'll get answers from probably me or more people. Follow us on Twitter, please, and just know every Monday we have a weekly podcast that comes out. Hopefully, a couple people are taking something from it. It's a lot of fun for me. We have a newsletter there that I absolutely suck at sending out, but if you want to sign up for it, more power to you. That's my website, and just know that if you're ever looking for anything that has anything to do with the symposium that we hold July 15th and 16th of this year, just search the hashtag #theseminar. And if you're ever bored when you're eating lunch, if you search the hashtag #learning at lunch, every day we put one of the videos up from the podcast. So when you're sitting there eating, you'll have something to go by with it. So thank you guys for, as Gary Vee would say, spending your most important resource, and that's your time with me today. I really do appreciate it. I hope that you guys could take something from this as well. Thank you very much. Huge thanks to Doug and Nikki and everybody involved at the Juniata College Strength and Conditioning Clinic. 1, for putting on a great event, as always, and 2, for letting me share this with everybody. Guys, if you enjoyed the talk, please share it through the social media outlet of your choice. Any thoughts or comments, leave them below. We wanted to open it for discussion out there, and we want to open it for discussion here. Marty, we're going to keep it quick again. Guys, hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you did, please share it. Otherwise, we'll be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.